G'day, David from the Bevel Maker. Now, I've got this DeWalt job site table saw. It's a ripper, but there is a problem with it. This bloody stand that comes with it is absolute rubbish. So that stand's so bad, in fact, that I've been using the table saw on the ground, much to a lot of your distress. So today, we're going to solve that by building a mobile cart for this thing that'll make it a lot safer and hopefully a lot more enjoyable to use. I'm also going to make sure it solves one of our other problems.
Storage. Yeah, I've got a problem.
So, let's get into it. All right, you know when just nothing's going right? Yeah, that's what's happening here.
Hang on. To get a true appreciation for the frustration of this day, we need to go back to the beginning. Alright, ignoring for the moment that I seem to have regrown my hair, I start off with the idea of building this rolling cart with a pine frame from some of the pallet wood I have taking up space in the garage. Believe it or not, this time around I actually had a plan, drawn out and everything. However, inevitably, this didn't last long. Me being the easily distracted man-child I am, I saw my last big MDF panel I'd reclaimed from a display suite that was being torn down, and decided that this single sheet was going to become the new home for my table saw. First up was working out how to cut it down to size. Now, there was no way I was going to try and manhandle this 3-metre piece through the table saw, and I don't have any of those big pieces of foam I see all the other YouTubers with. Seriously, where do they even store those bits of foam? Anyway, I decided to use a couple of my pallets as a makeshift bench to set up my cuts and keep my blade and driveway safe. Using an old shelf and some quick clamps as a circular saw guide to keep my cuts straight, I was full of hope, as I think everyone is at the start of a new project. I mean, the sun was out, nothing had gone wrong, yet, and I was busy thinking to myself, this will be a nice, quick project. Now, for those of you that were hoping for a how-to guide, I'm sorry to disappoint. This will be more of a, well, let's call it a learn from my mistakes video. But the mistakes I made throughout this build are the reason I've decided to give these plans away for free. Hopefully having the plans will save you from the pain and suffering of trial and error. Now, we're only a few cuts in to what was going to be a quick and easy project, and things are already starting to go wrong. If you look closely, you can actually see the disappointment in my hands.
Alright, well, I totally buggered up that cut. Measure twice, cut once. Apparently I need to measure 3 times, cut once. Anyway, notice before I went all the way through the board, so now it's going to be a design feature. Yeah, it'll be fine.
So another handy tip, don't change your plans last minute. And if you do, make sure that your hand-drawn chicken scratchings are not confusing. So, where was I before I started adding in design features to this build? Oh yes, free plans. There's a link below in the description for some plans to this build, and a massive shout out to Barber's Paddock Woodworking for putting these together for us in SketchUp. Please, if you haven't seen his videos, go and do yourself a favour. I've linked to his channel below. Now, I've always managed to use pocket holes without needing to buy one of those pocket hole clamps. Don't ask me how exactly, probably through sheer stubbornness. However, today my stubbornness must have been lacking, as it didn't matter how much pressure I applied, I couldn't get a nice tight fit. Yep, a second screw will definitely get the job done there, David. Yeah. So anyway, now I'm the owner of a pocket hole clamp. Yep. Honestly, I should have bought one long ago. Makes it so much easier. I'm sure at this point you're all madly typing away in the comments that I shouldn't be using pocket holes. And sure, you may well be correct, but bear with me. I'm trying to keep this build simple. Using dados or any other number of joints might be stronger, but honestly, I'm not convinced that they're needed for shop furniture. Simple doesn't always mean bad. So, it's probably about now some of you have noticed something different about me. Yes, you're correct. I'm no longer on Team Safety Flip-Flop. Sadly, my better half has forced me into work boots after reading all of your heartfelt concern on the last video. Now, I've agreed on one condition. The safety flip-flops will return if it's over 30 degrees in the garage. Now, all I need to do is to protect them from being thrown out until summer returns. Despite a few mistakes and a trip to Bunnings, we've already got the basic frame together, wheels on, and done the mandatory scoot around the garage on it. Now it's time for the table saw. With all the measurements actually perfect for a nice change, things are looking good. So I got a bit excited and fastened the saw down with some long screws. Next up is cutting the side extension table for the top. To get this to fit perfectly, just simply use a bit of editing trickery. Or, if that fails, use whichever blunt handsaw you have lying around and combine that with some guesswork. Seriously, don't look too closely at how badly this is cut. After using some thin MDF to finish off the back of the cupboard, ensuring there's still enough space for the rails to slide past, it's on to adding what makes this cart something special: a fold-up outfeed table. You will notice that I've also used another piece of that MDF on the back of the side panel to make sure that when the hinges are mounted, they're aligned. The trick with mounting these hinges is to have them below the table saw rails, then bulk up the top with some spacers. Now that's explained quite poorly, but you'll see what I mean, I promise. At this point, I'll also mention two things. I've linked to both the hinges and the wheels I use below. The wheels from Viva in particular, I'm actually super impressed with. Now, getting the outfeed table level with your saw is going to be one of the things you really want to get right. Basically, the thickness of your blocks will depend on how you mounted the hinges. So, go slow, measure 16 times, and you'll be fine. While I'm mounting the outfeed tabletop, the wind is picking up, This, it would turn out, was the wind of change and misery. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself. Currently, I'm still blissfully unaware of the frustration of the next hour.
Alright, so I've stuffed up again. The top rail down here. This one is not wide enough. Basically, looks fine, but I need a cupboard door to close, and therefore I need this to be down a bit more. Bugger. Alright, you know when just nothing's going right? Yeah, that's what's happening here. So these little screws, they're square drill bits. I wasn't using a square drill bit. Well, that was much easier. Right tool, right job. Huh, who would have thunk it?
So, after learning a vital lesson about patience and using the correct drill bits, I decided now is as good a time as any to smash my phone. And I mean, totally destroy it. It's a new morning and the sun's back shining, and $500 later, I'm able to start filming again and keep going with this cabinet. So far, it seems to be one of those projects that was teaching me more about myself and the durability of my phone than actual woodworking. So many things had gone wrong, I needed to take a step back and focus on what I had achieved rather than the mistakes I'd made. And even more important than that was to just keep going and build these damn drawer boxes out of pallet wood. Now, I'm no expert at making drawer boxes. You could even say these are my first ever drawer boxes I've made. However, it doesn't feel like that, due to the sheer number of woodworking videos I've watched. So, much like everyone else on the internet, before I've even made my first drawer box, I have quite strong opinions on the best way to do them. After roughly milling down these pallet slats, I'll cut the sides to length. I've decided to only put 2 drawers in so I can store some of my bulkier items. Now, this is by no means a guide on how to make drawers. However, I do have a couple of tips. First up is working out how big to make your drawer boxes. Basically, measure your drawer cavity width and take off 25mm, or 12.5 for each side, if you're using the same style of drawer slides as I am. I'm just going to use a simple lot of pocket holes, but I'll make sure they're hidden. Basically, to do this, you place the pocket holes in the front panel so they face outwards, as they will be covered by the drawer fronts. Then, place the ones on the back so they face the rear of the cabinet. The drawer bottom is quite simple to cut on the table saw. Basically, set your fence up a couple of millimeters away from the blade, and the height so it's roughly half the board thickness. Then send all your drawer slides through, apart from your back panels. Then before you move the fence, send a scrap piece through. After you've done that, bump your fence over slightly, send your scrap piece through again, and use it to test the fit of your base. It should be a good fit, but not tight. You should be able to slide the base without too much pressure. Once you have a good fit, send all your pieces through again. But before you move the fence, raise the blade all the way up and send your back pieces through. This makes for a nice, easy assembly, especially if you do it upside down.
Yeah, so I've stuffed up again and cut the drawer bases too narrow. Fuck.
So, after another totally planned trip to Bunnings, I decided to get some melamine covered MDF. Because if I'm going to spend money on drawer bases, I may as well get the stuff that's easy to wipe down. Checking my measurements 3 times meant the drawer bases fit perfectly, and after a quick assembly, it was time to mount them. Another tip, when mounting drawer slides, use spacers to save stuffing up the measurements. Not that I would ever mess up measurements, but you know.
Alright, so we're on the final stretch. All we've got to do is the 2 drawer fronts, cut them down to size, put the hinges on the front door, sand it all back, finish it, and then we're done. Now, I may or may not have gone to the football last night and had a few drinks, so it might be a slow finish, but finish we will.
Alright. It is very rare that things just work out for me. And this is just millimetre perfect. Meant to be, we're using it.
Now that is one of the slabs I made in our pallet hunting video. I was actually saving it for our next project, which I'll be doing a small point of sale stand for Beard Street Barbecue. But sometimes you just need to take the win. Sorry, Troy. While I was at the big green shed earlier, I also ended up caving and getting this concealed hinge jig. I figured it seemed to be a project where things just weren't going to plan, so this would at least save me one more potential issue. And man, it's super easy to use. Craig makes some pretty good stuff, if I'm honest. Now, this is my favourite part of any project, the point where everything starts to come together. It's not quite done, but the vision you had before you started it all is now at the cusp of being a reality. After fitting the hinges, it was time to finally decide on what to make the drawer fronts from. I ended up deciding to go with some black butt flooring I got from a lovely lady from Bookface in St Kilda. Now, as it turns out, the tongue and groove was swollen and not even close to fitting. My first thought was to cut it off, and in hindsight, I probably should have. But for whatever reason, I decided to pull out my trusty carbon steel scraper and try to get it back in working order. I really should have spent longer getting this tongue and groove fitting better, but apparently I still hadn't learnt my lesson of patience. Thankfully, the trust I was putting in the clamps to pull all the joints together paid off, and I managed to keep the panel pretty flat as well. Now, I know it seems like a bit of a waste using it for shop furniture, but I knew it had some pretty bad water staining, and I wanted to see if I could get it out. To start with, I believed I'd be able to sand it off, but it turns out it was stained deep into the wood. At this point, I remembered an old trick I'd seen in the deep, dark corners of Reddit. Basically, you mix equal parts olive oil and white vinegar, rub it on, and leave it for a few hours. Much to my surprise, it actually worked quite well. Not perfect, but pretty damn close. It also smelt like the side salad you get at the pub with a parma. This was making me quite hungry after my night of drinking, and luckily we're on the home stretch, needing to just cut the drawer fronts down to size and put on the finishing touches. To attach the drawer fronts, I use a method I kind of feel is cheating. I basically put double-sided tape on the drawer box, position my drawer front with spacers, then pull the drawer out and attach with screws from the back. No measuring or skills required, which for me is perfect. I've also learnt that my ghetto lighting rig causes the camera to have a rave, so yeah, I'll avoid using that in future. My bad. The easiest way in my mind to position the handles is to hold the handle up to each edge, mark the point where the other side of the handle lands, then use a square to mark that same point on the bottom side. Using a straight edge, you then line the top left mark with the bottom right corner, the bottom left mark with the top right corner, and you should end up with a little X. Do the same on the opposite side, and it should, in theory, have marked the point to drill the screw holes for the handle, ensuring that it's perfectly centered. Now, trying to explain that sounds complicated, but I swear it seems so simple in my mind. Shop furniture is the perfect time to try out new techniques without fear of stuffing it up. Now, while this build may not have taught me as many new techniques as I was maybe hoping at the outset, it has made me appreciate that the more things that go wrong and the more you have to overcome, the more you appreciate it on the other side. Remember, it's not what happens that defines you, but rather how you respond to it. So thank you for watching and all the support, and keep being awesome. Cheers.